Hi, it's Anthony Magnabosco, and I'm 99% sure that you're watching Atheist Edge.
We had done the Atheist experience had always been on public access television.
Okay.
But the public access studios are basically dying. The internet is killing them off, and it's just much easier and it's much more reliable for us to do it in our own studio and stream it, provided you have the money to, set up the call box, which we're getting ready to buy a new call box to replace the old one. But what happened was, after I was president, Jim was president, then Russell, and then Jamie took over along with some new blood, and there's a lot of enthusiasm going on there, and they were like, why can't we do more shows? And so we'd always had Atheist Experience and then Nonprofits, and then Beth started Godless Bitches.
Yeah.
And then there was, that went on hiatus, Nonprofits went on hiatus, but they're back. And then the next thing you know, now we've got, I'm not even gonna be able to name them all, but there's Secular Sexuality, Parenting Beyond Belief, Truth Wanted, Mr. Atheist, Preaching Humans. I don't know. I'm going to forget somebody and they're going to be mad.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is that it's more than just call in and argue with us. Now we're dealing with kind of more the whole person.
Right.
And they're actually, I'm so proud of the people that are working there that are doing this. I get no credit for any of this. I just show up and do the show.
God helped me survive a traumatic event.
Prove it.
Trees are proof of God.
Prove it.
Atheists have faith also, and atheism is just another religion.
No, so you're admitting there's a problem with having a religion? Hey, that's a common response. As soon as you say, well, you're just another religion, essentially it's a response to a challenge that a religion is a bad thing. Well, you're a religion too, and okay, well, at least you're admitting that I'm right, that religion's a problem, but no, I'm actually not part of a religion. And we talked about the FOSTA, SESTA rulings that are causing websites to shut down in order to protect us from sex trafficking. And basically the short version is that I'm not convinced that those laws will actually do that at all. Yeah, this is what Blake and I went through when we debated whether or not faith could be rational, because Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as faith is the evidence of things unseen. And so that makes faith essentially the justification for why you could believe something that was unseen. Under that definition of faith, then of course it's not rational. There's nothing that I couldn't justify based on that type of faith. But Blake defended a different one, which is faith just means confidence. And I'm like, okay, then let's just use the word confidence. That way we don't get confused when people say they have faith. Instead, they can just say, I have confidence, and now we don't have an argument. Talk Heathen is very similar to Atheist Experience, except it has a completely, I've been on it a couple times, but by and large it has a different pool of hosts. So you get different voices, but also they're more interested in getting repeat calls so that they can have extended conversations with people over a long period of time. I don't mind if somebody calls in over and over, but I'd like to get as many new calls and as many new viewers as we possibly can.
C, anti-pope, D, faux pope, or E, George Carlin.
I'm going to go with Pope on a rope. There was an incredibly frustrating one a couple weeks ago that I called out for being dishonest. That one's fresh in my memory. Some of them are out there as highlight clips. There was a guy who used to call in as Three Eyes. Is it Three Eyes?
Howdy.
Hi.
I want to introduce myself first as Three Eyes, and I'm a witch doctor. We're sitting there smoking a joint, and I found myself standing right in front of a glowing 6-foot-tall Negro ghost. So I grabbed my .357 Magnum. Am I on?
Was his pseudonym, and we eventually stopped taking calls from him because it was getting nowhere. And he's the one who told me how to prove and how to enter the spirit realm by making a mirror, and you had to use screws and not nails, and then you would hold the mirror. You had to have a rope tied around you. You'd hold the mirror under running water like a creek, and then you could get sucked into the spirit world, which is why you had a rope and you needed a friend hanging onto it. It's been on for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've been hosting it for almost 15. It'll be 15 here in a couple months, I think. Something like that. What ended up happening is we existed when YouTube started taking off, and we started posting content, and we started streaming very early. We did it from the public access studio even before they had the capacity to do it, because we had a bunch of tech geeks. And so we just went in and said, hey, you've got internet, we'll set up a laptop, and we'll just go ahead and stream the show live. 40 years to walk from Egypt to Israel. What took him so damn long? Oh, sorry, that's not the question.
Or would you agree?
Yeah, I
with that?
love Blake. We have always been friendly. I've had him over to the house. We sat on the couch and had conversations. I think I exposed some flaws in his epistemology in one of those talks, but you know, granted, Blake and I have done like 5 or 6 debates at this point. I think we're both trying to avoid doing it again, or it looks like, you know, the Christian atheist road show where it just becomes shtick. And so, you know, well, I think we're both looking for other opponents, but yeah, he's a genuinely good guy, smart guy. I'm getting ready to do a video on Bayes' theorem and how it is misapplied and has zero application in the question of whether or not there's a fucking God. I know people like posting clips of like me ranting or some caller getting smacked around. That's
Right.
not really the purpose, but that is part of the appeal.
You know?
Anybody who calls in with their A game, who is open to actually having a conversation, those calls last 30, 40, 50 minutes, who knows? If you're calling in just to preach and not listen, you're going to get the no, you're done. We're done. You're done. You're done. You're done. You're done. Oh gosh, please. You're done. Stop. What the hell is your problem that you're calling about? I don't know why you're calling us. I used to rail against people who were single issue voters, and it turns out that I was just mad at the issue that was their most important. I don't think I would necessarily be a single issue voter, but there's some that are such a high priority. Like literally in the 2016 election, my wife and I were largely in agreement. She would only post one real comment about the election, and that was repeatedly saying, it's about the goddamn motherfucking Supreme Court. That's all she would post. And for her, she views that as a single issue thing. And of course, based on who you elect, because, okay, a president's gonna go after at most 8 years now, but who you put on the Supreme Court is going to affect the world we live in for decades, if not generations. And that is probably also my highest priority issue. I think it comes from the big question is, why is there something instead of nothing? Why are things the way they are? You know, why is there anything? It's very appealing to have this idea that the universe was created with a purpose and that we were that purpose. It's arrogant, and it's an area where we don't necessarily have good answers. And that's frustrating for me because more people need to get comfortable with just saying, I don't know, because at most points, that is the one and only correct answer you can give. So I don't know that, I would say there's no theistic argument that's particularly compelling, but there are some that are so bad that basically the ones about origins become more convincing.
Right. Unless you're following God.
Yeah, and then you're going to do circles following a pillar of cloud and pillar of fire.
We're going to be about 40 years late.
Good job, God. God's the worst damn GPS on the fucking planet. But he was really raiding Philistine towns. How did he get away with it? Fake news. Tracy and I are the main hosts, and then there's a rotating pool of co-hosts on there. And with me traveling, you know, it was supposed to be me and Tracy kind of alternating, but I had been doing a bunch of traveling. And then there was a month, I don't know, July or August or something, where I had nothing. And so I was just like, can I do all the shows this month? And they're like, yes, you can do all the shows. So, because I miss it. I mean, I love doing it. So today I'm doing the Magic and Skepticism lecture for the Solstice Party. I'll run around doing debates and, you know, other speaking events. If you get nothing else out of this, Blake uses Bayes' theorem to conclude that God almost certainly exists, and Richard Carrier uses Bayes' theorem to conclude that Jesus almost certainly didn't exist. Now, we're running into conflicts there, and this is because some of these questions don't have priors, they're only as good as what numbers you put in there, and Bayes' theorem is a statistical analysis that is designed specifically for updated, new information. Let's adjust the priors based on new evidence, and that doesn't happen for the God question. So, you know, there was a guy who emailed me recently who was arguing on behalf of Bayes for this God question, and I pointed out a bunch of flaws. I just got an email back from him yesterday. He's actually a professor who teaches Bayes' theorem, and he's like, yeah, I think you found some serious flaws in the application of Bayes' theorem to these sorts of questions. And I'm like, good. None of this was expected. I was just somebody who found my way out of religion, stumbled upon a group, the first time I did the show, it was an accident because Jeff D didn't show up. So I wasn't even expecting to do the show. I wasn't necessarily expecting to love doing the show, although I walked home that day and said, I'm going to be doing that show full time in no time.
Nice.
Because I loved it. I didn't expect to like it that much. I didn't expect people to like what I had to say. I certainly didn't expect to be sitting on stage in front of thousands of people. I didn't expect to kind of restructure my former magic career into something that was actually teaching and useful that people liked. There's almost nothing about being prominent to whatever extent I am. I'm still, it's this tiny little pond we're in here. I didn't expect any of it. And that's the other thing, for the people who ask, how do I get into this? How do I do this? How do I get to be good at it? You just do it and you keep doing it. It's practice. You go back and watch a clip of the show from 14, 15 years ago. If I'm not better now, then I've kind of screwed up. I mean, that would be ridiculous to think you haven't improved over the course of 14 or 15 years. If I'm not doing the show, I'm still out doing debates and other stuff. I'm still getting email related to the show. I'm probably arguing less online than I used to.
Yeah.
Just because, I don't like Twitter arguments at all. These issues are far too complicated. Ray Comfort called into the Atheist Experience on a couple of occasions, but the one that I recall is I went down the path of slavery, as I often do. And Ray's response was, I never said I believe everything in the Bible. And I don't know why that soundbite from Ray isn't, like on a keychain. So when he's out there preaching, people can just... Had a Baha'i guy stop by the ACA and watch the show not too long ago. I'm going to see if I can get him or one of his representatives to come and do a podcast, because Baha'i are very proud of the fact that they can reconcile their religion with science, and I want to watch them do that. For a lot of my debates, I'll do I always do a little bit of prep work. It'd be silly not to, but I don't do as much as I used to, because I'm better on the fly, off the cuff.
Yeah.
If I've written a speech, it feels too much like I'm reading to somebody.
Right.
If I've prepared for the person, I never want to prepare for the person.
Yeah.
Because you're not there to argue the person, you're there to argue their arguments.
Right.
And it's just, 15 years of doing it. Yeah, I still brush up on stuff. I'm constantly reading and learning stuff, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I gotta be on the show tomorrow, so let me go study what.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen that way.
It's that not to believe.
Still quiet inner voice. Basically, he trusts his gut because he's convinced that his gut is the Holy Spirit, and I'm convinced that his gut has, digestive bacteria and acid in it. I voted for Bernie in the primary. I voted for Hillary in the general. I pissed off a bunch of Bernie bros the other day because when he announced that he was running in 2020, I corrected his poster, mostly because I thought it was an absolutely terrible slogan. Because if you're running for something, the first two words in your slogan shouldn't be "not me." But I didn't want him to run in 2020, and I didn't want Hillary to run in 2020. Not because I don't like either one of them or anything else. It's not because they had their time. It's because I don't want anything that reminds us of 2016. I want us to show that we've actually got progress, that we've got candidates, that we're not going to rehash what happened 4 years ago and end up with another 4 years of Trump. I'm trying to put a podcast together where it's me and that person, in person when we can. I've got the studio already set up for it, both at the ACA and at my house. 30 minutes, one very narrow topic. Where you can't just leave. We're not going to do something like, does God exist?
Yeah.
I'm going to there's a Sikh guy that has emailed, and I'm going to get him to come in because he wants to explain how he how he makes religion and science compatible within Sikhism. And so Sikhism, his religions, he's a Sikh.
Oh.
And so I want to give him the opportunity to do that and talk about it. And I find it curious that we would have to even reconcile science with it. It's just, it's either something you can demonstrate or it's not.
He asked Matt, when do you plan on releasing your book?
Yeah, I'm not answering that.
Okay.
No, the thing is, a lot of things have happened in my life in the last year, including Pangburn, who was running the events, that's fallen apart and bankrupt, and it cost me a bunch of money, and then I'm getting divorced, and there's tons of stuff, and now I'm booking my own events, and I've got stuff going on. So so technically my birthday is at the end of the month, and I at Christmas set a goal of having the first draft done on my birthday. Yeah, that isn't happening at all. Maybe next birthday.
Is this? I don't know if that's the same thing as the Satanic Temple, though. That's
See,
not the same thing, right?
That might be the trick part of the question.
Okay.
So Satanism falls into a number of different categories. There's LaVeyan Satanism, etc.
Yes.
And I actually did a debate not too long ago outside of Ohio with a Satanist who was going to argue that religion was a good thing on behalf of his religious view. And before we even got partway through cross-examination, he'd already changed his mind and agreed with me. So we went on to take questions from the audience.
Yeah.
It was one of my favorite debates because you saw someone say, okay, I'm going to change my mind. You convinced me in the short time. And that rarely happens. Any idea, religion or anything else, if it is most easily sold before people develop critical thinking skills, or when those critical thinking skills are impaired by problems in life or late life, being addled or whatever else, if those are the times when your arguments are most compelling, that's a problem. Because that's not the way good epistemology works. That's not the way science works.
Right.
It should be convincing to the most rational, most critical thinkers at the height of that. That's not the case with religion. Put your answers over in the comments.
Exactly. Put the right ones this time. We saw what you did last time.
No extra credit. It's not just the Catholic Church that's done things like this. There are Mormons who have prayed to get people to heaven even after they're dead, or prayed for relatives who were never Mormons and things like that.
Okay.
So, maybe that's some kind of a ticket to heaven. Maybe it's kind of a pardon. Maybe it's a blessing. I am who I am. And if somebody else wants to sit there for 15 years taking the same calls and see whether or not they don't go off on occasion.
Yeah.
But what I try to do is make sure that I maintain whatever high ground. So that I try to make sure that they're going to become combative before I do. Or if somebody's just refusing to answer a question, half of the time that things get spun up, it has nothing to do with the content. It has to do with the fact that cell phones, which everybody has, and that's what most people are calling into the show with, they don't do full duplex very well. So if you're trying to politely interrupt somebody, they can't hear you because they're talking, and their phone will not let them hear you talk. Or not very good at it.
Interesting.
That causes probably, and we've got the best phone system we can, it's just I can't do something about somebody's cell service or the way their phone works.
When would you consider using physical violence against a peacefully protesting neo-Nazi / white supremacist / white nationalist / white separatist?
Never.
Sarai or D, Rachel?
So this question is fundamentally flawed, and I actually have a video in the queue about this specific person.
Okay.
And it's good that you included the extra biblical sources because they're not mentioned by name in the Bible.
Right.
And it's a matter of interpretation as to whether or not that verse in Genesis or the verse in Isaiah actually apply to the individual we're referencing.
Right.
It's kind of like, if you go back and read Genesis, it's a serpent, a talking serpent.
Right.
But we kind of retcon that to be Satan based on interpretations of others. Nowhere in Genesis does it say that the serpent was Satan.
No.
But that's generally the view. Where else are you going to get a talking serpent that's trying to lead people away?
Right.
And so what people have done is they've taken an extra biblical source that describes the person whose name is the answer, and then we go back and look at that passage in Genesis and Isaiah, and people are like, oh, this is who it's actually talking about. And I'm not convinced that the case is good enough, but you should still be able to pick out the answer there. And so as long as there's a mix of positive and negative feedback, I'm pretty okay with it.
Right.
And if somebody makes a good case that you really screwed up when you did this, you can convince me and I'll fix it. Just do what you care about it. Do it for the right reasons. If you're doing it because you want to be a famous atheist, or because you want to show everybody how smart you are, or how you're right and they're wrong, or you want to bash on people with religion, you're doing it for all the wrong reasons. If you actually care about making the world a better place, about understanding why people believe, about helping people understand how they may be wrong, if you're doing it for the right reasons, keep at it. You may never end up famous, but you might have a clip out on YouTube that changes more minds than the one we posted that got 700,000 or 5 million. There's enough room for a lot of voices and a lot of different methods. There's no just one right way, which is why the atheist community of Austin is now producing 9 different shows. Several of them are call-in, because we need many voices. I would never tell anybody, do it my way, because my way's the right way. My way's one way, and it's worked out pretty well. But you don't want to be me. No, you definitely don't want to be me.
Number 2, why did God kill Aaron's 2 oldest sons?
Because he could. Oh. Sorry. I don't care about who. It's not the person. I'm debating an issue, and half the time I don't want to know that much about who I'm debating for fear that I'll fall into the trap of preparing to debate that person rather than debating the issue at hand. So, I mean, you could probably list, I was looking forward to debating D'Souza, but that fell through. It'd be nice if William Lane Craig would stop, I don't know, being a pretentious jackass. But I understand, he gets to debate who he wants, but I don't have specific people that I want to debate. I just want to do more debates. When you phrase it that way, it essentially makes an implicit claim that the motivation was to jail more blacks and Hispanics, and I don't think that was the motivation. I think it was a side effect that not enough people gave a shit about.
Panspermia.
I would have gotten this wrong.
I don't even know what that is. What is panspermia?
Panspermia is the notion that the origin of life began somewhere else in the universe and was accidentally or intentionally
alien
planted here.
seeding of
could be aliens, but it also could be a meteor that has organic molecules, crashes into Earth, and that kicks it off.
Okay.
And really, it only pushes the question back one step, which is, okay, how did the organic molecules get on?
Right. How did that life come about? Yeah.
That's a problem. But those are cool options for the answers.
Yeah, a couple
I wonder
of them
how
seem
many
pretty
people
cool.
are going to get that one right.
Yeah.
I was raked over the coals for suggesting that it was not only anti-humanist, but strategically stupid to run around punching people for their speech. Because when Richard Spencer got punched and everybody celebrated and started this new round of let's go punch the Nazis, my response was pretty straightforward, and that is the smartest thing Spencer could have done would have been to pay somebody to punch him while he was being interviewed on TV so that he could make the points that he made. And if it's smart for him to do it strategically, it's stupid for us to do it for free. You don't have a burden of proof for not accepting a claim. You just don't. There's no burden of proof for I am not convinced. There is a burden of proof for I'm convinced you're wrong. I'm in favor of making sure that we have some sort of universal basic income.
I think what they're getting at is increasing automation going to make it necessary, no matter if you want
I
to
think
or
it's
not.
already necessary. I don't know that the automation fundamentally changes that, but then that's not my field. I would just, as a humanist, the base thing is we have people in poverty and in need, and it's not necessary that that be the case.
Okay.
I don't know how you could possibly demonstrate that the motivations of people who were instituting laws weren't just bad ideas that didn't care enough about the impact on minorities and were instead intentional goals of let's incarcerate minorities.
That seems weird to me.
Allowing the male to, and breastfeed is in quotes.
Yeah.
Is clearly, I mean, while my man boobs are in decline, they're never going to breastfeed anybody.
Probably not.
So mattdillahunty.com is currently being updated, so that's not going to be helpful. Probably the best thing is just to try and find me on Facebook, facebook.com, Matt Dillahunty. I'm there, I'll post stuff.
So I'm going to just, you don't even have to answer now, I'm going to just,
I'll say yes. You're getting ready to see if me and Steve will come on and talk?
no, I just want you to unblock them.
Oh, I won't unblock him. Come on. And here, I'll explain why. This is easy. I'm happy to have, and I told Steve this, and I told other people this, I'm happy to have a conversation with him. Actually, Alex Malpass was going to set up a three-way conversation with us. I block people not because I disagree with them or I found them smug or whatever else. I have to manage the stuff that's coming at me on Twitter and Facebook because I am so obsessed about engaging on absolutely everything, and some things are futile. That's the thing is, though, that to me would still be a minority position that isn't the reason why people vote for or support those things. When we talked about anti-abortion legislation, for years I fought with my wife and others because they would say, oh, the religious right just want to control sex, they want to punish women for their biology. And as somebody who, was...
And I agree with that.
Okay. I don't know how you can possibly demonstrate that, but I also know it's absolutely false, because I used to be one of those people, and never was my motivation to punish women for their biology or to control sex. My motivation was to protect the life of the fetus. And what happened in addition to that was that's just tough luck. That's just the way it is. You live in this world, and yes, if it disproportionately affects women, then that's just the way it's got to be. But to say my motivation was to punish women for their biology is just flat wrong. And so when you make claims about what people's motivations are, you run the risk of them saying, well, gosh, my motivations have never been like that. And then they get to disregard everything you said. So instead of talking about what somebody's motivations are, I pretend to read minds on stage, but I can't do it for real. Instead, I can say the religious right wants to impose legislation that has the effect of controlling sex, punishing women for their biology, and they don't care enough about that effect because for whatever reason, maybe that's their motivation, maybe they have a different one, but they don't care about this real effect. And if you talk about the actual effects, you don't ever run the problem of falsely accusing someone of having a negative motivation. And that's why I'm fine with saying that there's systemic racism, there's systemic sexism. Some of it used to be codified, some of it is now changed. It is institutionalized in the sense that it is ingrained in the culture. But I don't ever have to say that it was somebody's motivation to throw as many African Americans in jail as possible. I can just say that they instituted laws that demonstrate they clearly didn't give a shit about whether or not they were incarcerating more African Americans than whites. And the problem has now been addressed without trying to pretend like I can read somebody's mind. And that's why I don't go to motivation.
Four largely godless cultures, and some
even
that have
Russia?
been imposed it. Well, Russia under... So this is a good time to correct something.
Okay.
Because people will often talk about the godless Russians and how they made Christianity illegal and they made religion illegal. And that is the case to some extent. But none of us here, and I'll speak for everybody here, want to outlaw religion. We just want people to give it up for good reasons.
Yeah.
And anybody who disagrees with that's just wrong anyway.
Right. Yeah.
I want them just free enough that they feel comfortable identifying as neo-Nazis and white supremacists, because we have a real problem with racial issues and other bigotry. And so if you make it so that now they're ashamed to say, yes, I'm a white nationalist, I'm a neo-Nazi, I'm whatever, how do you tell which cops are racist?
I don't run around telling agnostics that they use it wrong. I recognize that there's more than one usage of the term atheism, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with more than one usage. And that's the reason we ended up with weak atheism and strong atheism. And I know that that's not particularly useful. And I know that there are lots of categories where it doesn't make sense. But by and large, hey, what's faggot mean? Oh, used to mean a bundle of sticks.
Or an old
If you
person
wanna be
before that.
Precise in your language, it means a bundle of sticks. But now it's used as a pejorative for homosexuals. If you can't recognize that there are different usages, you're never going to be able to communicate with people effectively, because you're only willing to communicate with your usage, and if they won't accept it, semantics are important because it's about what words mean, even though primarily it's about usage. But if the words are getting in the way, throw them all out. Let's make up a completely new word for whatever the concept is we're talking about, sort it out, run through it, and then figure out if there's an existing label that can apply or should apply. But as soon as you start telling people they're wrong, when you're talking about a huge subset of the secular community that uses the atheist label in this way, I don't care that you're going with a very esoteric or pedantic, special, I want to use specific language, that's fine. Other people aren't doing that. And when you tell them they're wrong to not do that, that's where you screwed up.
And I don't buy into the fears of automation. Yeah, it's going to kill jobs. It's always killed jobs. Jobs die. The world changes. And there are other potential solutions, perhaps going down a full socialist type society route. I'm fine with notions like that. But the fact that we go for automation because it's cheaper, I'm in favor of that too. It's a good thing. If we can make the process by which we do things more efficient, more cheap for all of us, then at least that means that there's more potential pool money out there to solve the problems for the jobs that may go away. There's no easy solution, but I am not going to, toss out progress and improvement just because it costs a blacksmith a job or a truck driver a job. And I know that pisses people off because truck drivers are closer to my age, and they're, oh, I'm not going to get a job in software or this other stuff. So yeah, there's real problems and no easy solutions, but I'm not remotely, that's probably why I wasn't that concerned with how automation affected it, because we're going to find some way to fix it. There are probably more immediate pressing problems that we should be fixing and we're not, than worrying about what happens when we get self-driving cars. But until, like, if somebody, let's say somebody with really bad motivations created a law, that law still has to be endorsed and passed by a number of other people. And until you get to the point where you can make a case that the majority of people advocating for something had the same motivations, I think it's a mistake to say that that was the motivation for it.
I would not have known this off the top of my head, but when we got halfway through the question, the reason I laughed is because the Earth doesn't maintain a constant distance from the Sun anyway. It's got an elliptical
There's a
orbit
perihelion and all that stuff.
Much greater than 10 feet.
Exactly.
So the notion that we were limited to just 10 feet, don't jump too high.
I get contacted all the time by secular organizations saying, hey, we'd like to have you down for a debate. And I'm like, great, find an opponent and a topic and then contact me, because I'm not getting my hopes up. I'm not even penciling anything in on the calendar until you have an opponent, because it's very difficult to find theists who are willing to step in and actually debate atheists that way, or at least finding anybody prominent. And
they sent out a message sometime in the last year just asking if there was any atheists willing to debate.
Yeah, because they're tired of me. One of the things is that there's some new studies that have come out that have, and I was reading one of them the other day, but I don't have a reference to cite. You can probably Google search it. That shows that the in-group, out-group thing, which is currently, well, it's pervasive, but quite often it's divided along racial lines or gender lines and other things, but it's still just an in-group, out-group thing. And what the study found is that once you change who is considered to be part of your in-group, like if you spend your time hanging out with more Mexicans, that fundamentally changes how likely they are to be considered your in-group. And so they contrive to have these mixed groups, and the former in-out lines begin to blur and vanish, and new in-out lines perform. So you can have this group where you've got like 5 Caucasians, 5 African Americans, and 5 Hispanic people, and where there might have been those lines within that group. Once this becomes the group that they're familiar with, this other group that is made up of equal proportions now becomes the out group for some other reason, either a political thing, and it's not even a real thing. They asked one group, what do you think the politics of people in your group are? And they tended to assume that the people in their new group agreed more with them than the people who were not in their new group. This in-group, out-group mindset is something that is a lizard brain tribal clinging on thing that we have. And once, I think if you begin to educate people about that, we'll break down some of those lines. I just have a difficult time, even when I've said and done things in the past that were sexist or racist or anything else, it was more about prioritizing the joke, prioritizing my in-group, prioritizing how I felt about things, than it was about hating or wanting to oppress another group. It was viewed not as let me keep blacks as poor as possible. It was, I don't know that group or care about that group enough to make this change an issue. And so when we start applying, nefarious or evil motivations to something that may just be negligence, ignorance, incompetence, or apathy, all of those are viable. And when you look at the voting block of people who would end up voting for legislation that has these effects, sorry, there's no way to say this, it's not condescending, and I include myself among the idiots. Most people most theists don't know what's in their Bible. Most people don't know what they're voting on when they go to the polls. I'm going to pick everything with an R, everything with a D. I'm going to, yes, let's decrease taxes, even when an increase of tax might be the smartest thing to do. It's nope, I'm going to vote based on I don't want to pay more taxes.
If there were sufficient evidence to warrant belief in a God, I would believe in a God. Doesn't matter which one it is. Doesn't mean I would worship it. I wouldn't I wouldn't worship any God, and any God that wanted worship isn't deserving of it anyway. And that goes down a second thing. How would it change my life? Well, I wouldn't be arguing against the existence of God, and I would still be exposing flaws and bad arguments for God, and I would be pointing them towards this new, better argument for God. And then we'd probably be spending our time talking about, okay, now that we're all convinced that there's a God, what are we going to do about it? What does this mean for us? What does this God want? And should this God get what he wants? Should we even care that there's a God? If this God doesn't demonstrate that it's acting in our best interest or has something useful for us or whatever, then screw him. And I've said, several times on stage, the biblical God's got a lot of explaining to do. And if, I don't know, are we language restricted on this show at all?
Nope.
If God's not a humanist, fuck him.
So here's what's going on direction-wise. Now, a funny thing happened at the debate that I did 2 weeks ago in Waco. And the topic was, does the Christian God exist? And it was me and Braxton Hunter. The debate's online. It's actually on both of our pages. But so I went, and I was basically using the argument for divine hiddenness and inconsistent revelation to point out that not only am I not convinced the Christian God exists, but I may in fact be convinced to some extent that it doesn't exist, but I certainly don't understand how they can do it, how they can think that they're justified. So the debate's completely over. And Leighton Flowers, who is the organizer of all this, gets up to thank everybody and give, an extra rebuttal. Now, he gets to do whatever he wants, and I wasn't going to complain. I'm certainly not going to cry foul. But when I listened to it, I definitely didn't want to say anything. Because essentially he got up there and decided that he needed to point out that all those things I said about looking for evidence for God, that's just a mistake. You don't want God to move a pencil or to, find evidence. God speaks internally with this inner, still, quiet voice. So don't look for evidence out there, just trust your gut. Now, I didn't need a comment beyond that, because to anybody who watches the debate who's not already part of his team, he basically stood up and said, hey, Matt's right. As an extra rebuttal. The debate was over between me and Braxton. Leighton gets up and does this, you're not going to find evidence of God out there, you just need to trust your inner voice. When I just got done explaining that that's how we end up with 1,000 different denominations that all identify as Christian. So if they're going to keep having those types of things at debate, it's no wonder they're having difficulty finding people to do it. I want to change the education system not only to include things like critical thinking and skepticism and comparative religions courses, but I think right alongside requiring kids to be vaccinated in order to attend public schools, they should also submit to a 23andMe test so they can find out they're not as fucking white as they thought they were. So transhumanism, it's gone through changes, and there's a whole bunch of different aspects to it. And for years, what I would get from transhumanists is that we're approaching this notion, this abstract concept of the singularity, at which point our scientific technology will allow us to essentially live forever. And as a skeptic, my answer is, okay, that's science fiction until you actually demonstrate that's true. Is it a worthy goal to pursue? Sure. Things that make us live longer, but make us more efficient, that allow us to, better use resources, that where we can potentially manipulate things to kind of control our own destiny. I'm in favor of those things. I don't necessarily know that it's an absolute extension of humanism, but it may be that if it turns out this is the best thing forward, then of course it would fall under humanist ideas. I'm fine. Let's pump money into research on human longevity, but let's not derail funds that are going towards climate change issues and stuff that, hey, we hit the singularity exactly 2 years after we all died off. I'm pretty good about acknowledging the fact that I have said and done racist, sexist things in the past. Sure. I also have a pretty good understanding of what I believed when I was still a believer. Sure. And I did not have a view of like women as secondary, and certainly not views with regard to race in that sense. Doesn't mean that I was immune to this, but I know that when your preacher is getting up there talking about how we need to oppose abortion access because God is the one in control of life, God grants life to a fetus, and it is our duty to protect that innocent life, the fact that there may be other motivations, they all become secondary at that point.
And it was the other day I did a video about deathbed conversions. At the end, I pointed out, if you ever hear I had a deathbed conversion,
Don't
your
believe
response
this
should
shit.
be, I don't care.
I don't care, yeah.
Why should anybody care that I became addled or changed my mind? If I change my mind and there's a good reason behind it, I'm making a video to get that shit out.
Well, we get different types of callers too. There are people who are questioning and searching. They're not all calling in to argue, but when you hear things that sound like fear, you're probably fearful of one or more of all of those issues. It's really difficult to have your core identity and beliefs, challenged, and to do it on live TV. So they're not. I don't ever see people who are fearful in the sense of. Well, I was going to say not in the sense of being cowardly, but those are the people that just argue dishonestly through the entire thing. When we tend to see a fear, yeah, I think there's, holy crap, could I be wrong, and what impact is this going to have on my life, and what am I going to have to change about my beliefs, and how is there a cascade effect from that? If I stop believing in God, does that mean anything goes, and all of a sudden rape and murder and everything else is allowed? Oh my gosh, it's all going to be
heard those, yeah.
So that type of fear, which is instilled by the religion, it's preying on normal human fears. So some of that comes into it. But since we have callers that call in, some of them are on their high horse and convinced that they're just going to plow right through us. And I have evidence for the existence of God. It's like
Changed lives.
it's the most common thing on the call screener. The call screeners will talk to him and just say has evidence for God, and inevitably when we ask them what this evidence is, none of it qualifies as evidence, or at least nothing beyond anecdotal testimonial. I found my car keys after praying. Good job.
C. Cleavage fest. Or D. Breast fest.
I'm going to Breastfest this year, by the way.
Just tell me where it is. I'm there.
Close personal friend of yours too, I might add, right?
I'm going to go see him tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
When we're done here in Dallas, tomorrow I head up to Tulsa.
So we're gonna
Shoot, I just gave away the answer.
Oh no. Well, I think only if they know where he lives, right?
All right. The easy thing for me is that there's a difference between implicit and explicit racism, sexism, whatever-ism. And so you have things like the KKK that are explicitly racist.
Although they deny that.
This is their stated motivation, we don't like people who aren't the same color as us. But that's explicit, and that's where you get into the motivational stuff where they're doing this. Then there's implicit racism, which I think is going to affect everybody to some extent, which is you're more comfortable with your in-group, and if you've been raised around white people and you're raised in a culture where men are dominant, then you end up getting these tendencies that are certainly racist and sexist. That doesn't mean they're your primary motivations. And the thing that I'm trying to point out is that if my primary motivation is something that doesn't touch on sexism or racism, and I prioritize that over good ideas about equality, then it would be wrong to say that my primary motivation is because of racism and sexism. Instead, it would be more correct to say that my primary motivation causes implicit racism and sexism, or has implicit racism and sexism as an ancillary thing. Could I be wrong about my own motivations? Sure, but I've spent a good deal of time going through and doing the sort of inventory that I don't know that everybody does. But I also know that I didn't have those views about women, in part because while my dad was definitely the head of the household, and my wife and his wife, my mom, would say all day long, your father is the head of the house just as Christ is the head of the church. They would say that. My mom was the head motherfucker in charge most of the time. And that duplicity completely annihilated that notion about women. Plus, the one thing that they did was that, this whole, women are special and you need to, don't talk harshly to women and don't, hit women and all this other stuff, which I changed to let's not hit anybody. Numero 8, Ocho. ESPN, the Ocho. Today's email was this guy who thinks he's a prophet from God, who's claiming that the super volcano at Yellowstone is going to erupt on the 11th at like 7:34 in the morning. He sent me all the details. And I normally would blow it off, but since it's only a few days away, I just sent him a single one-line response that says, "What if you're wrong?" Because I want him to come back and say, "Oh, there's no way I'm wrong." Oh, there's no way you're wrong. If you're getting this message from God, and we get to March 11th, and that volcano doesn't erupt, wouldn't that be disconfirmation of your God, or the fact that you're getting messages?
Yeah, really.
By the way, I love you.
Love you too. Even if we're getting ready to massively disagree on a hot button issue, which would be fun.